The chandeliers of the Met Gala dripped light onto the city's most powerful. I am Julian Croft, a king in my private equity world, Croft and Sterling Holdings. My husband of 15 years, Thomas, stood beside me, a perfect portrait of devotion. Then I saw him, Marcus Thorne, my arch-nemesis, the man who'd tried to ruin me for a decade. He caught Thomas's eye. It wasn't a glance, it was a silent, intimate conversation. Thomas's hand, resting on my arm, flinched, a flicker of guilt. In that charged space, their secret became my truth. The polished marble floor seemed to crack beneath me. My entire empire, my marriage, all of it became a weapon. And I finally knew where to aim. Thomas wasn't just my husband, he was my anchor. The Sterling, in our perfect social brand. The celebrated artist whose quiet grace was meant to balance my boardroom brutality. He was the one part of my life supposedly untouched by the sharks. And Marcus Thorne was the apex predator. For a decade, we'd been locked in a cold war of acquisitions and hostile takeovers. He saw business as a blood sport, I saw it as architecture. He built nothing, only conquered. A corporate raider in a Savile Row suit, hungry for the foundations I'd laid. He represented everything I despised: shortcuts, spectacle, and a profound lack of honor. To see them exchange that look, it was to understand the devastating precision of the attack. This wasn't a crime of passion. I knew Marcus. This was a strategic move, a siege laid against my legacy, with my own husband serving as the Trojan horse. They thought they were discreet, hidden in plain sight. But in our world, every secret has a price, and I was about to set the market. Their betrayal wasn't just personal, it was business. And business, I understood perfectly. Our war wasn't born in a boardroom. It was forged in fire 10 years ago. The prize was Aero Innovate, a brilliant but struggling aerospace startup. It was my passion project. I saw its future, the elegant genius in its engineering. My plan was a decade-long build, turning it into an industry titan. Marcus Thorne saw a carcass. He didn't see innovation. He saw patents to be stripped, assets to be liquidated, a quick and brutal fortune to be made. We fought for it for 6 brutal months. A war of numbers, of influence, of sheer will. I was winning. I had the board on my side. Then, on the eve of the final vote, a story leaked to the press, a meticulously crafted scandal about my father's old business dealings, twisted to paint me as the heir to a corrupt empire. It was a lie, but it was a perfectly timed one. It created just enough doubt, just enough fear. The board folded. They voted for Marcus. He gutted Aero Innovate in less than a year, fired 2,000 employees, sold the core patents to a foreign competitor, and walked away with a 9-figure profit. I saw him at a fundraiser weeks later. He was basking in the glow of his victory, a shark smiling through a sea of champagne. He cornered me by the bar, his voice a low hiss of expensive cologne and contempt. "Sentiment is a liability, Julian," he'd whispered, his eyes glinting. "You build monuments to your ego, I build fortunes, and fortunes always outlast monuments." I went home that night, utterly broken, defeated. Thomas was in his studio, the scent of turpentine and oil, paint a welcome antidote to the city's stench of decay. He put down his brushes, wrapped his arms around me, and just held me. He didn't press for details. He simply said my integrity was worth more than any company, that men like Marcus eventually consume themselves in their own greed. He was my sanctuary, the quiet, clean room in my embattled life. He was the one who encouraged me to let it go, to channel my anger into building something new, something stronger, something untouchable. Croft and Sterling was born from those ashes, built on that advice. I see it with blinding clarity now. Every comforting word he spoke was poison. He wasn't my sanctuary, he was Marcus's listening post. While I mourned my loss in his arms, was he relaying my weaknesses? Was my grief just another piece of market intelligence for them to leverage? The celebrated artist, calming the corporate titan. It was the perfect cover story. He wasn't balancing my ambition. He was sharpening my enemy's knife. This war didn't start at the Met Gala. It had been raging in my own home for a decade, and I was the only combatant who didn't know it. They didn't just steal a company from me. They stole my past, twisting every memory of comfort into an act of profound, calculated treachery. The car ride home was a vacuum. Thomas attempted small talk, dissecting the gala's guest list, his voice a smooth, familiar melody that now sounded like static. I responded in monosyllables, my mind a storm of fractured images. Marcus's predatory smile, Thomas's flinch, a decade of my life replaying itself as a lie. He placed a hand on my knee. "Are you all right, Julian? You seem distant." I looked at his hand, the artist's hand that had supposedly soothed my ambition and healed my defeats, and felt nothing but ice. I was not distant. I was, for the first time in 15 years, terrifyingly present. I saw the wiring, the mechanics of the trap I'd been living in. "Just a long night," I said, my voice a flat line. Back in our penthouse, the silence was heavier. He went to his studio. I went to my office. The door clicked shut, and I made a single call. Not to my lawyer, not to a friend. I called a man named Elias, a whisper in the security world, a digital ghost who specialized in unearthing the skeletons people paid millions to keep buried. My instructions were surgically precise. "Thomas Croft and Marcus Thorne. I want everything. Communications, financial ties, travel. I don't want a snapshot. I want the entire, unedited film. Go back 10 years. There was a pause on the line. "That's a deep excavation, Mr. Croft." "I own the mine," I replied. "Send me the bill." For 72 hours, I lived a double life. I was Julian Croft, husband and CEO. I discussed quarterly projections, took Thomas to dinner at Per Se, and listened to him talk about a new series of paintings inspired by, quote, "the fragility of trust." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I smiled, I nodded, I played my part. Each moment was a performance, and beneath the calm exterior, I was a coiled spring of pure, cold fury. I wasn't waiting for proof of the affair. I was waiting for the terms of my own surrender, written a decade ago. I needed the full scope of the damage report before I could calculate the cost of my retaliation. The email arrived at 3:17 a.m. A single encrypted file with no subject. I opened it. It was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just recent hotel check-ins and sorted text messages. Elias had unearthed a ghost ledger. There, timestamped 6 days after Marcus Thorne finalized his acquisition of Aero Innovate, was the first transaction, a wire transfer for $250,000. It moved from a Thorne Enterprises shell corporation into a Cayman Islands account, an account opened by and belonging exclusively to Thomas Sterling Croft, my husband. It was followed by similar payments, a quarterly retainer for a decade. This wasn't a passionate affair. This was a long-term hostile infiltration. My husband wasn't a cheater. He was a paid informant. Every secret I had shared, every moment of vulnerability, every strategy whispered in the dark, all of it had been an asset, sold to the highest bidder. I didn't break. I didn't rage. The grief I should have felt was instantly cauterized by a white-hot clarity. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the monitor. The face staring back wasn't a husband. It wasn't a victim. It was the CEO of Croft and Sterling Holdings, and I was about to orchestrate the most brutal, elegant, and hostile takeover of my entire career. They had made my life a business deal. Now I would make theirs a bankruptcy. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my office until the first gray hint of dawn bled over the Manhattan skyline, the Cayman Islands bank statement glowing on the monitor like a tombstone. There was no grief, no heartbreak. Those emotions were luxuries, liabilities I'd been trained to divest. What remained was a stillness so absolute it felt like the quiet center of a hurricane. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction I had co-authored for 15 years. The man sleeping in my bed, however, was a hostile asset, and I was about to liquidate. I walked into the kitchen as the espresso machine hissed. Thomas was already there, sketching in a notebook at the Marble Island, the picture of domestic bliss. He smiled, a lazy, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. It never had. I just hadn't been looking closely enough. "Morning," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Big day for you. The Apex merger closes." I poured myself a coffee, my hand perfectly steady. "It does. We should celebrate tonight. That new place in the West Village? My treat." He gestured with his pencil. "The gallery sold the triptych. I was thinking we could finally take that trip to Kyoto." His treat. With my money. With Marcus Thorne's blood money. The casualness of it was breathtaking. Every word was a transaction. Every suggestion of intimacy was a negotiation. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw only the architecture of his deceit. The charming artist, the supportive spouse, it was all just brilliant branding for the product he was selling. Me. "Maybe," I said, "my voice even. I have something else in motion, a much larger play. It's going to require my complete focus." He looked up, a flicker of genuine curiosity, or perhaps professional interest, in his eyes. "Bigger than Apex? Julian, what could be bigger than that?" I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness was clarifying. I met his gaze and gave him the most honest smile I had in a decade. "Leverage," I said. "I'm restructuring the foundation of the entire company." I placed my cup in the sink, the ceramic making a sharp, definitive click against the steel. "I have to go. I'll be late tonight." In the back of the town car, speeding through the canyons of Wall Street, I didn't call my lawyer. I didn't call my board. I called a man named Kenji Tanaka, the CEO of Horizon Global, a Tokyo-based conglomerate and Marcus Thorne's most patient and ruthless competitor. They had tried to buy a piece of my company 3 years ago. I had refused. Tanaka answered on the second ring. "Croft-san. An unexpected pleasure." "Kenji," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You once expressed an interest in acquiring a controlling stake in Croft and Sterling. I'm calling to inform you that my position on the matter has evolved. I'm ready to discuss terms. But there is one condition. This must be the most silent, surgically precise corporate execution in history. And it must happen immediately." There was a long silence on the line, the kind that costs millions of dollars per second. I could almost hear the gears turning in Kenji Tanaka's mind, 1,000 miles away in Tokyo. He wasn't processing the offer. He was reverse engineering my motive. Men like us don't sell our legacies on a whim. "An empire does not fall silently, Croft-san," he finally said, his English precise. "It implodes. The sound is quite loud." "Not if the foundation is removed first," I countered. "I will handle the silence. You will handle the execution. I'm not just selling you Croft and Sterling. I'm selling you a loaded gun with Marcus Thorne's name engraved on the barrel. Once the ink is dry, my sole condition is that Horizon Global initiates a hostile takeover of Thorne Enterprises within 30 days. Use my infrastructure, my people, my capital. I want him dismantled. I want his name scrubbed from every letterhead and his portrait taken down from every boardroom. That is my price." Another pause, shorter this time. He understood. This wasn't business. It was annihilation. "My ghost team will be in New York in 12 hours, he said. "They will require unrestricted access. If your books are as clean as your reputation, we can close within the week." "They'll have everything they need," I said, and ended the call. The war was now on 2 fronts. The first was the covert sale of my kingdom. The second, and far more delicate, was the public fabrication of a masterpiece of corporate fiction, designed for an audience of one, Marcus Thorne. I spent the next hour in my office drafting the framework for a ghost project, codenamed Project Icarus. The target, Viridian Dynamics, a leader in next-generation battery technology. It was a brilliant company, and more importantly, it was Marcus's obsession. He'd made 2 failed attempts to acquire them in the past, blocked by their fiercely independent founder. An acquisition of Viridian by Croft and Sterling wouldn't just be a business move, it would be a personal humiliation for Marcus. It was the perfect bait. I called my chief operating officer, a woman named Anya Sharma, who had been with me since the ashes of Aero Innovate. I trusted her not because of loyalty, but because of her profound, unsentimental pragmatism. I met her in a sterile conference room, the city lights glittering below like a field of scattered diamonds. I told her nothing of the sale to Tanaka. I told her only that we were preparing a surprise offensive against Thorn. "We're going to make a play for Viridian," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need a full top-level acquisition proposal drafted. Financials, projections, integration strategies. I want it to be the most compelling M&A document this firm has ever produced. And Anya, I want it to be flawed." She raised an eyebrow. "Flawed how? I want the valuation to be 20% too high. I want the synergy projections to be wildly optimistic. I want it to look like a masterpiece of hubris. A king stretching too far for his crown. And I want it ready in 48 hours. Its existence must remain a secret between you and me." She didn't ask why. She just nodded. Icarus, an appropriate name. That evening, I went home and performed the role of a lifetime. I left my briefcase open on the desk in my home office, a folder labeled Icarus, strictly confidential, peeking out. I took a staged, tense phone call on the terrace, my voice just loud enough for Thomas to overhear from his studio. I used keywords like unprecedented leverage, all in, and once Viridian is ours, Thorn is finished. Later, as we sat in the sterile silence of our minimalist living room, Thomas swirled the wine in his glass. "You seem energized," he observed, his artist's eye trying to read me like a canvas. "That larger play you mentioned?" I feigned exhaustion, running a hand through my hair. "It's the move that will define my career, Thomas. Or end it." I leaned forward, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "Thorn has been trying to get his hands on Viridian Dynamics for years. If I can close this deal, I don't just win the war, I erase him from the board entirely." I watched him. It was subtle, but it was there. A slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his grip on the wine glass. He was a fisherman, and I had just thrown a bleeding piece of chum into the water. The information was logged. The asset was activated. The next 72 hours were a blur of calculated deception. By day, I met with Tanaka's ghost team in a rented, anonymous office suite downtown. They were specters in gray suits, moving through my company's financials with terrifying efficiency. By night, I played the part of the obsessed CEO for Thomas, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, a fabricated email from Viridian's founder, a note about liquidating assets to finance the deal, for him to find and report back to his master. On the third day, Elias delivered his report. It was a single sentence in an encrypted message. "Thorn is moving. He's leveraging everything, including his personal holdings. He's preparing for a bidding war. Asterisk, he'd taken the bait. All of it." Marcus, the great corporate raider, was about to launch a full-scale assault to acquire a company that wasn't for sale, based on intelligence from a spy I was actively feeding. He was betting his entire empire on a lie, leveraging his real assets to fight a phantom war. The call from Tanaka's people came that evening. The deal was ready. A private jet flew me to a discreet airfield in Geneva. There was no boardroom, no ceremony. The meeting took place in a silent, white hangar that felt like a surgical theater. Kenji Tanaka wasn't there himself. He sent his most trusted emissary, a man who bowed but whose eyes missed nothing. The documents were presented on a simple metal table. The sheer weight of what they represented was staggering. Decades of my life, my ambition, my triumphs and failures, all condensed into a few dozen pages of impenetrable legalese. I picked up the pen. There was no hesitation. The man who built Croft and Sterling, the man who loved Thomas Sterling, was already dead. I was merely the executor of his will. I signed my name. The transfer was initiated from a laptop on the table, a quiet series of clicks that sealed the fate of two. The flight back from Geneva was silent. I didn't look out the window at the world I once owned. I felt no seller's remorse, no sense of loss. It was the opposite. I felt the profound lightness of a man who has placed his explosives, set the timer, and is now walking calmly away. The weight of my legacy was gone, replaced by the clean, simple mechanics of revenge. As the jet began its descent into New York, my phone buzzed with a single, encrypted message from Anya. It was a link to a Wall Street Journal news alert. Thorne Enterprises announces unsolicited tender offer for Viridian Dynamics at 40% premium. Asterisk, he'd done it. Marcus had pushed all his chips onto the table to win a game that didn't exist. He had mortgaged his empire to buy a ghost. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a thin, cold smile. The king was in check. I walked into the penthouse. The scent of linseed oil and expensive wine hung in the air. Thomas was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of champagne in hand, looking out over the city. He turned, his face illuminated by the setting sun and the glow of victory. Our victory, he thought. You did it, he breathed, walking towards me. I heard the news. He's going for Viridian. He's over-leveraging. He's going to bankrupt himself. You've broken him, Julian. He tried to wrap his arms around my neck, to kiss me. I held up a hand, stopping him cold. The warmth in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by confusion. We need to talk about your compensation, I said, my voice flat. I walked past him to the marble dining table and placed my briefcase on it. I opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. My compensation? He stammered. For what? For the triptych? I told you, the gallery. For your decade of service to Marcus Thorne, I said, sliding the paper across the polished surface towards him. It was a printout of the first Cayman Islands wire transfer, the date, the amount, the shell corporation. His name. He looked at it, and the color drained from his face. The artist, so adept at capturing the subtleties of light and shadow, was suddenly a portrait of pure, stark terror. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. It was never an affair, was it, Thomas? I continued, my voice as calm as a mortician's. An affair has passion. It has weakness. This was a business arrangement. You were an embedded asset. So tell me, was I worth it? Was my trust a commodity that paid good dividends? Julian, please, he finally whispered, his hand trembling as he reached for the paper. It didn't start that way. I don't care how it started, I cut him off. I only care how it ends. Project Icarus was a fiction. A beautifully crafted lie designed for an audience of two, you, the messenger, and Marcus the fool. There is no deal for Viridian Dynamics, there never was. You fed him my masterpiece of hubris, and he swallowed it whole. The truth landed like a physical blow. He staggered back, clutching the table for support. The champagne glass slipped from his other hand and shattered on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, absolute silence. As of an hour ago, I said, snapping my briefcase shut, I am no longer the majority shareholder of Croft & Sterling. The company has been sold. Your primary source of intelligence has been liquidated. I turned and walked towards the door, my footsteps echoing on the marble. He didn't try to stop me. Who? He choked out, his voice raw with disbelief. Who would you sell to? I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I didn't turn around. You should turn on the financial news. I imagine it's going to be a very educational evening for you both. I stepped out into the hallway and shut the door behind me, sealing a decade of my life inside what was now just a room with a view. In the elevator, my phone vibrated again. It was a news alert from a different service. In shocking Wall Street move, Tokyo-based Horizon Global acquires Croft & Sterling Holdings in landmark deal. Horizon CEO pledges aggressive new market strategy. Asterisk the first tremor. Marcus Thorne was now trapped, his company leveraged to the breaking point for a phantom prize, just as his greatest competitor, armed with my entire arsenal, appeared on his doorstep. It wasn't justice, it was just business. The elegant, brutal architecture of a perfect collapse. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to the same anonymous office suite where I'd sold my life's work. It was a glass box in the sky, devoid of personality or history, a perfect blank slate. I poured a whiskey and stood at the window, not looking at the view, but at the reflection of the news ticker scrolling across the television screen behind me. Thorn Enterprises, down 70% in after-hours trading. Horizon Global's tender offer for Thorn's debt was being called predatory and a masterstroke. The analysts were breathless, trying to connect the dots between my sale and Marcus's sudden, spectacular implosion. They couldn't see the architecture of it, only the wreckage. My phone, a new burner I'd acquired that afternoon, rang with an unknown number. I knew who it was. I answered and said nothing. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged breathing. Then, his voice, no longer the smooth hiss of a predator, but the jagged rasp of a cornered animal. You burned your own kingdom to the ground just to spite me? Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice calm. I'm restructuring. Thomas, he choked out the name. He told me, Project Icarus. It was all you? Assets are meant to be leveraged, I replied, the words tasting like ash and iron. Wasn't that your philosophy? You saw my husband as an asset. I simply saw him as bait. I'll destroy you for this, Julian. I'll tell the world, he screamed, his rage dissolving into desperation. I almost laughed. Tell them what? That you were so blinded by greed you bet your entire fortune on a lie fed to you by a man you were paying to betray his husband? You won't be a villain, Marcus. You'll be a punchline. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting the silence stretch. 10 years ago you told me that fortunes always outlast monuments. You were wrong. I hung up before he could respond. I blocked the number and turned off the phone. The city lights below glittered like the ruins of a fallen star. I felt nothing, not joy, not triumph, not even satisfaction. It was the quiet, hollow peace of a balanced ledger. I hadn't won a war. I had simply corrected a market inefficiency. They had made my life transactional. In the end, I was just closing out my account. Okay, I need to know what you guys think about this. Was selling her entire company the ultimate power move for revenge? Or did she cross a line and end up hurting herself more in the end?